I had only recently moved into an old apartment in New Jersey, one of those low brick buildings with narrow hallways and creaking stairs. I was newly divorced and trying to start over in the most basic way possible. Nothing fancy, just a cheap place close to work so I wouldn't have to depend on anyone. That week I was still living out of boxes, eating whatever I could and sleeping poorly. The building had that smell of old wood and cheap cleaning products in the lobby, and I was still in survival mode, trying not to think too much about what I'd lost. It was in that state that I met the neighbor next door, Evan, too friendly right from the start. He showed up while I was carrying a box upstairs, offered help, and made easy conversation. I accepted because I was alone and tired, and he seemed like just a nice guy. He helped me with 2 heavy boxes, laughed at something silly, and said, "Welcome." I remember thinking that at least I'd gotten lucky with the neighbors. That particular night I came home from work and found a message from him in the hallway. One of those quick, if you need anything, let me know exchanges. Like a polite neighbor. I replied out of courtesy and went about my routine. Shower, quick dinner, low TV volume, bed. But earlier he'd said a few things that stuck in my head. He'd commented, "You shower late, huh?" in a casual tone, like a guess. Then he added, "Your living room window doesn't close properly, watch out for the wind," and laughed. I didn't remember mentioning any window or my shower schedule to anyone. I tried to justify it to myself. Maybe he'd heard the water. Maybe he'd seen the window open. Even so, I felt a discomfort that didn't match a simple moving favor. When I turned off the lights, I realized he even knew which lamp I left on at night. I stood in the dark for a few seconds, listening to the building, trying to convince myself it was nothing. That was when I heard a creak in the hallway outside, like a light, slow step. At first, I thought it was someone going up or down the stairs, normal in an old building. The problem was that the sound didn't move away. It was a short creak, then a long pause, then another creak, always in the same rhythm. I lay there staring at the ceiling in the dark, trying to tell whether it was coming from my floor or the one above. The silence between the sounds was too long for someone walking normally. I held my breath without realizing it, trying to listen more closely. At some point, I had the clear impression that the noise was coming very close to my door, not from the hallway in general. I got up slowly and went into the living room, stepping carefully so I wouldn't make any noise. I pressed my ear to the door and heard nothing at that moment, but the sense of presence didn't go away. I went back to the bedroom, but I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned, trying to rationalize it until I remembered something he'd said earlier that day. He'd commented that these old doors sometimes don't close properly, laughing as if it were just a random observation. At the time, I hadn't paid attention. Now it seemed less casual. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, shining it on the lock to check if it was really locked. It was. Even so, I felt a discomfort that didn't match a simple, helpful neighbor. I sat there on the edge of the bed waiting to hear something again. When I finally started to drift off, I heard a very low sound coming from the living room, like someone touching something with extreme care. It wasn't loud enough to make me jump out of bed, but it was too specific to ignore. It sounded like something being nudged and repositioned, like a box being pushed a few centimeters across the floor. I froze completely, trying to figure out whether it could have been the building settling or some pipe noise, but it had come from inside my apartment. I got up again, my heart racing, and walked to the bedroom door. I opened it just a crack and looked into the dark living room. Streetlight filtered weakly through the window, casting shadows on the furniture. Everything looked in place, but I had the clear sense that something was different. The silence now felt heavy, as if someone had stopped moving because I'd woken up. I went back to the bedroom and picked up my phone, not to use the flashlight this time, but to think about what to do. I felt stupid for being scared, but at the same time I knew this wasn't normal. It was that night that I decided I needed some way to confirm whether I was imagining things. The next day, before going to work, I stopped at an electronics store and bought a simple camera, an indoor one, nothing fancy. I installed it pointing toward the living room, at an angle that covered the front door and part of the hallway. I didn't tell anyone, not even him. That night I followed my normal routine, left the camera on and went to bed trying to act as if nothing was wrong. I woke up in the middle of the night with that feeling that someone was in the apartment, even though I hadn't heard anything specific. I lay there, motionless, staring into the dark, trying to decide whether to get up or not. I didn't hear footsteps, didn't hear doors, didn't hear anything besides distant street noise. After a few minutes, I fell asleep again, more out of exhaustion than calm. When the alarm went off in the morning, the first thing I did was grab my phone and open the camera app. My hands were cold as the video loaded, and I still thought I'd find nothing but hours of empty footage, maybe a neighbor's cat passing through the hallway. I was wrong. The video showed the dark living room lit only by streetlight, until shortly after 3 in the morning the door slowly opened. It wasn't forced. The lock turned carefully, like someone who knew exactly how to do it without making noise. He entered without turning on any lights. It was Evan. I recognized him immediately by the way he walked and by the light-colored jacket he always wore. He closed the door behind him with the same calm, stood still for a few seconds looking around, and then started walking through my apartment as if it were his own. I watched the video without blinking, feeling a strange weight in my chest. He moved slowly, without any hurry, stepping around the boxes as if he knew exactly where they were. At one point, he stopped near my bedroom door. He stood there for a few seconds that felt far too long, his head slightly tilted as if listening to my breathing. Then he moved away and went into the kitchen. He opened one cabinet, closed another, touched something at the sink. He didn't seem to be looking for anything specific. It felt like he was just checking things. At one point, he went to the living room window and tested the latch, exactly the window he'd commented on days earlier. Everything in the video felt rehearsed, like a routine. What disturbed me most wasn't seeing him there, but realizing that he moved like someone who had done this before. There was no hesitation, no curiosity. He didn't behave like someone exploring a new place. At one moment, he sat down on the couch, exactly where I sat every night, and stayed there for almost a full minute, motionless, staring at the wall where the TV was. Then he stood up, went to the door, and left the apartment the same silent way he'd entered. The recording clearly showed the lock turning again. He had a key, a copy of my key. I sat on the bed for an amount of time I can't measure, staring at the now dark phone screen, trying to decide what to do first. My whole body was tense, like I'd just woken up from a nightmare that hadn't ended yet. The first thing I did was get up and check the door. It was locked, as always, with no sign of forced entry. That sent a different kind of chill through me, because it confirmed he hadn't broken anything. I went back into the living room and started noticing details I'd ignored before. A box was a few centimeters out of place. A glass I remembered leaving in the sink was dry and put away. Things too small to draw attention, but now they screamed that someone had been there while I slept. I spent the rest of the morning on autopilot. I took a quick shower, got dressed, and went to work with the constant feeling of being watched. I ran into Evan in the hallway as I was leaving. He smiled the same way he always did and casually commented that I'd woken up earlier that day. That froze me inside. I answered something vague and left without looking back. At work, I could barely concentrate. All I could think about was how long he'd been doing this and what else he knew about me. The idea of going back to the apartment that night made my stomach knot. When I got home that night, the first thing I did was change the lock. I didn't wait for the landlord's permission or tell anyone. I went straight to a store, bought a new cylinder, and installed it myself, my hands shaking with anger and fear. While I was doing it, I constantly felt like someone could appear in the hallway at any moment. Every footstep sound made me stop and listen. After that, I locked all the windows, left the lights on, and sat on the couch without turning on the TV. I could only stare at the door, waiting to hear the lock turn again, even knowing he no longer had the key. Later, I heard someone knock on the door. It wasn't loud. It was that polite, restrained knock, exactly like someone expecting to be answered. I didn't respond. I stood there holding my phone, my heart racing. From the other side, I heard his voice, calm, asking if everything was okay, saying he'd noticed something different about the lock. That sent an immediate chill through me. He noticed the change without even trying to get in. He said he wanted to talk, that I could open the door without fear. Stayed silent. After a few seconds, he let out a quiet laugh and walked away down the hallway as if none of it were strange. That night, I barely slept. I kept switching between the bed and the couch, listening to every sound in the building as if it were a warning. At some point, I heard footsteps in the hallway and the creak of the stairs, but there was no way to know if it was him or just some neighbor coming home late. What bothered me most was the certainty that he knew exactly how I would react. He didn't seem rushed or frustrated. He seemed like someone testing boundaries, taking notes. At one point, I got up to get some water and noticed the living room window was unlocked. I was sure I'd locked it. I locked it again carefully, feeling my hand sweat against the cold metal. The next day, I woke up early and decided I couldn't keep living like that. I went to talk to the building manager and vaguely explained that I'd had a security issue. I didn't mention names. I just said someone had entered my apartment without permission. He listened in silence and said he'd already received vague complaints about that neighbor before, but nothing provable. That gave me a strange, tight feeling like I'd arrived too late. I went back to the apartment and started packing some things into boxes, determined to leave as soon as possible. While doing that, I noticed a faint mark on the doorframe, as if a key had recently been tested there. I moved out of that apartment a few days later. I didn't wait for the lease to end or anything like that. I took what fit in the car and stayed at a friend's place until I found somewhere else. On the last day, as I carried boxes down the stairs, I felt that same gaze I'd come to recognize. He was standing in the hallway, leaning against the wall, watching in silence. He didn't try to talk, didn't ask anything. He just watched, with the same calm expression as always. I walked past him without saying a word, but I felt a strong chill when I realized he already knew I was leaving before I'd told anyone. A few weeks later, I ran into a former neighbor from that building by chance and casually asked if Evan still lived there. He frowned and said he didn't remember anyone by that name on that floor. He mentioned that the apartment next to mine had been empty for months before I moved in, and that no one had officially moved in during the time I lived there. To this day, I don't know how he got a copy of my key, or how many nights he came in while I slept. What I do know is that some people don't want friendship. They want access. They want routine. They want to know how you live when you think you're alone. Story 2. I was working as a temp at a warehouse on the outskirts of Illinois night shift, because it was what came up after I needed to gather money quickly. It was the kind of huge place, cold inside, with harsh white lighting and forklifts moving around all the time. I didn't really know anyone in town, so I just did my shift, went home, and tried to sleep. The people there were closed off, everyone kept to themselves, and I wasn't really looking for friendship. But there was one guy, Mason, who was quiet, kept to himself, and occasionally struck up a conversation with me during breaks. He wasn't overly friendly or invasive at first. He just seemed like someone trying to get through the night shift with less boredom. Over time, I started noticing small coincidences outside the warehouse. I'd stop at a 24-hour gas station to get coffee after my shift, and he'd show up there too. Heading home as well, I'd stop at a grocery store near my apartment and he'd be in the aisle saying he'd forgotten something. At first I thought it was normal, because the town wasn't big and we worked at the same place. But it started happening too often, always at very specific times, always at the exact places I went after work. And worse than that, he talked as if he knew I'd be there. He didn't ask, "Do you come here often?" He said things like, "You got out a little later today," as if he'd noticed. That started adding up in my head, but I still tried to explain it away as coincidence. The night everything changed started like any other. I left the warehouse a bit later because a delivery was delayed, and I remember that clearly because I was irritated and exhausted. I got into my car thinking only about getting home, taking a shower, and sleeping. When I turned onto the street that led into my neighborhood, I saw a car parked on the other side of the road with its headlights off. I didn't think much of it at first until I realized it was his car. The same dented bumper, the same dim interior light on. I drove past pretending I hadn't seen it and parked in front of my house. Before I even turned off the engine, he got out of his car and waved like it was the most normal thing in the world. He said he was just passing through and decided to stop because he recognized my car. He said it laughing in a light tone, as if it were a funny coincidence. That made no sense at all. My street wasn't a through route to anywhere. It was residential and ended in a dead end. I stayed in the car with the door open, talking from a distance, saying I was tired and wanted to go inside. He didn't come any closer, but he stood there looking at the house, the garage, the back door, as if he were evaluating something. At one point, he commented that my kitchen light usually stayed on late. I had never told him that. My stomach dropped instantly. I closed the car door and walked toward the front entrance, trying to keep the conversation short. He followed me a few steps, still talking in that overly calm tone, saying it was good to know I lived in a quiet place. When I asked directly how he knew details about my routine, he laughed and said it was easy to notice those things if you paid attention. That irritated me. I told him he was crossing a line and that this wasn't normal. His smile disappeared for a few seconds, and the mood shifted sharply. He said I was exaggerating, that he was just being friendly. Still, he took a step back as if he'd decided to end it there. I went inside and locked the door immediately. I stood in the living room for a few minutes, listening to see if he was still outside. I didn't hear anything. I carefully went to the window and saw that his car was still parked there, but empty. After a while, he left. I thought that was the end of it. But as I tried to sleep, the encounter kept looping in my head, especially the way he'd looked at the house like he already knew everything. I got up to get some water and noticed something out of place. The back gate was unlocked. I was certain I'd locked it before leaving for work. I went to the back of the house carefully, turning on only the hallway light. The gate was closed, but the latch was loose, as if someone had tested it and left it that way on purpose. I went back inside with my heart racing and grabbed my phone, thinking about calling someone, but I didn't even know what to say. Nothing was stolen. Nothing was broken. Still, the sense of intrusion was undeniable. I walked through the house, checking doors and windows until I noticed something that made me go cold. On the kitchen table, my phone was sitting where I didn't remember leaving it, and next to it was another phone. A phone that wasn't mine. I recognized it immediately. It was Mason's phone, black with a worn case at the corner, the same one I'd seen many times at work. I stood there for a few seconds without touching it, just staring, trying to understand how it had ended up there. He hadn't come in with me, I'd locked the door. I picked up the device carefully like it might bite me. The screen lit up with a light touch, no password. The first thing open was the photo gallery, and that's where I realized this hadn't started that night. The first photos were of the warehouse parking lot, taken from a distance with zoom. My car appeared in almost all of them, from different angles on different days. As I scrolled, the images got closer to my routine. Photos of me entering the grocery store, leaving the gas station, walking up to my front door. Some were blurry, clearly taken in a hurry, but others were far too steady, like he'd stopped just to capture them. The timestamps showed weeks of monitoring. This wasn't recent. He'd been watching me long enough to know my habits better than I wanted to admit. Farther down, I found photos of the front of my house taken at night, with the kitchen light on, exactly like he'd mentioned. There were images of the front door, the back gate, and even my car parked in the driveway, photographed from different angles. The last photo was the one that disturbed me the most. It was of the back door, taken from very close up, with the handle filling most of the frame. The timestamp showed less than an hour before I'd gotten home that night. My hands started shaking so badly I had to sit down. This wasn't curiosity, it was surveillance. I sat there for several minutes trying to decide what to do with his phone in my hands. Part of me wanted to run out of the house and never look back. Another part wanted answers, even knowing I might not want to hear them. I looked again at the back door, imagining when he'd come in. There were no signs of forced entry. He knew how to open it, or knew exactly when I wouldn't be paying attention. The idea that he'd been there other times started to make horrifying sense. The coincidences at the store, the gas station, on my way to work, it all lined up in a way that made me feel sick. I set his phone back on the table and went to the front window. I looked out at the empty street, expecting to see his car parked there again. There was nothing. The silence of the early morning felt different now, more tense, like the house had been exposed. I went back to the kitchen and took photos of the photos with my own phone, thinking I needed to document everything before something happened. While doing that, I noticed there was a separate folder in the gallery, unlabeled. I opened it. Inside were more images of my house taken from very close, some clearly shot from the backyard. One of them showed my bedroom light off. The timestamp indicated I was asleep. My entire body snapped into a strange state of alert, like I'd spent too long ignoring obvious signs. I closed the folder, turned off his phone, and put it in a drawer, out of sight. I went to the bedroom, locked the door from the inside, and sat on the bed trying to control my breathing. Every small creak of the house sounded louder than it should have. I didn't sleep. I stayed there, sitting, listening to the wind hit the side of the house and imagining whether he was outside, watching, waiting for me to make a mistake. The strongest feeling wasn't immediate fear, but the certainty that I'd been studied carefully over weeks, as part of a routine that wasn't mine. When morning came, I left the house early and went straight to the police station. I brought his phone, showed the photos, and explained the situation as objectively as I could. The officer listened carefully, asked a few questions, and grew serious when he saw the timestamps and angles. He said it clearly constituted stalking and that I'd done the right thing by coming in. Later that day, I found out Mason hadn't returned to work. The supervisor said he'd simply stopped showing up without telling anyone. His car wasn't in the parking lot anymore either. I moved a few weeks later without telling anyone at the warehouse. To this day, when I see someone by coincidence in the same places I go, I don't hesitate anymore. Some people don't want friendship. They want access, control, and routine. And they only back off when you notice. Story 3. I'd started going to a neighborhood gym in Arizona after my divorce, more to keep my mind busy than out of real motivation. It was a regular, local gym with strong air conditioning and music that was way too loud. I almost always went at the same time because my job was stable, and so was my routine. After about 2 weeks, a guy started working out near me frequently. He introduced himself as Troy, seemed friendly, calm demeanor, easy to talk to. At first, it was just gym stuff, asking how many sets I had left, commenting on workouts. Little by little, he started working in more conversation, asking where I lived, where I worked. I answered out of politeness without thinking much about it, because it seemed normal and harmless. He started showing up exactly when I arrived, as if he had timed it, and he always said the same thing. "We have the same rhythm. That's rare." At the time, I even thought it was something positive, because I was pretty isolated and had no friends in the city. But the feeling began to change when I tried to create distance and couldn't. One day I arrived earlier, half an hour before my usual time, and he was already there. I thought it was a coincidence, but he said, laughing, "You came earlier today, huh?" That made me uncomfortable right away because I hadn't told anyone. I changed my schedule again the following week, going much later, almost at closing time. On the second day at that new time, he showed up in the parking lot when I was leaving. He walked between the cars as if he already knew exactly where I had parked. He said he was leaving too and offered me a ride, as if it were completely normal. I politely declined and said I lived nearby, that everything was fine. He insisted a bit, smiling as if no were part of a joke. When I got into my car, I saw him standing there watching, not leaving, just observing. And I went home with the feeling that I had been chosen because I was alone. After that, I started noticing how present he was outside the gym. One day, I stopped at a market near my place and saw Troy in the beverage aisle, pretending to choose something. When I passed by him, he commented that I usually bought the same brand, as if it were a casual observation. Another night, I went to a more distant drive-thru, trying to change things up, and saw his car parked a few meters behind me. He didn't honk, didn't wave, just stayed there, waiting. That stopped feeling like coincidence. I started leaving the gym, looking over my shoulder, trying to identify if he was nearby even before changing clothes. I decided I needed to cut it off completely. I started training at random hours, sometimes early in the morning, sometimes close to midnight. Even so, he showed up, not always, but often enough to make me tense. One of those nights, while I was putting my things away in the locker, he commented that I was running away. He said it in a calm tone, almost hurt, as if I were being unfair to him. I clearly said that I wanted to train alone, that I needed space. He stayed silent for a few seconds, looking straight at me, and answered only, "Okay." The problem was that the way he said it didn't sound like acceptance. It sounded like someone taking note of information. That same night, I left the gym earlier than usual, with the feeling that I needed to get away quickly. The parking lot was almost empty, just a few lights on, and the distant sound of the avenue. I unlocked the car and got in, already putting the key in the ignition. Before starting it, I looked in the rearview mirror out of habit. I didn't see anyone. I felt relieved for a second and looked down at the dashboard. That's when I heard a slight movement behind me, like the leather of a seat being pressed down slowly. I froze instantly, feeling my stomach drop. I lifted my eyes again, this time looking at the center mirror. He was sitting in the back seat, leaning slightly forward, with his hands resting on his knees. He didn't look sweaty or rushed as if he had just come out of the gym. He was far too calm for that situation. He looked at me through the mirror and said in a low, controlled voice that, "Friendships don't end like this." He said it without anger, without a direct threat, as if he were correcting a mistake I had made. I didn't scream. I didn't move. I just stayed there trying to understand how he had gotten into the car without me noticing. The door hadn't been forced. At some point, I must have left it open long enough for him to get in. I felt my entire body lock up, as if any movement would provoke something worse. He kept talking in the same tone, saying that I had misunderstood everything, that he was just trying to be a friend in a place where no one connects anymore. As he spoke, he looked straight ahead, not directly at me, as if trying to seem reasonable. His smell was strong inside the car, a mix of deodorant and dried sweat. I noticed that the rear door on his side was unlocked, and that gave me a concrete reference point to think about getting out of that situation without escalating anything. I answered briefly, telling him he needed to get out of my car right now. He stayed silent for a few seconds that were far too long, took a deep breath, and said he didn't want to scare me. Without arguing, he opened the door and got out. He didn't slam the door, didn't make any sudden movements. Before closing it, he just said that we would still see each other at the gym, as if that were inevitable. He closed the door carefully and stepped a few paces away, standing under the streetlight. I waited until he was out of my field of vision before starting the car. I drove away without looking back, my heart pounding so hard it almost hurt. I drove aimlessly for a few minutes, trying to regain control, repeating to myself that it was over, even though it didn't feel true. That night, I didn't go straight home. I drove without thinking much, just trying to put distance between myself and the gym. Every traffic light made me nervous. Every car that stopped behind me seemed suspicious. At some point, I parked at a 24-hour gas station just to be in a lit place with people around. I stayed inside the car for several minutes, my hands still shaking on the steering wheel, trying to process what had just happened. The idea that someone had gotten into my car without me noticing shook me in a way that's hard to explain. It wasn't just fear. It was the feeling that I had lost control over something basic, my own safety. When I finally got home, I went into automatic mode. I locked the door, checked the windows, turned off the outside lights, and walked through the rooms without being able to relax. I looked out the window several times, expecting to see his car slowly passing down the street. I didn't see anything that night. Even so, I slept poorly, waking up at every small noise. The next day, I didn't go to the gym. Not the day after either. I changed my work hours when I could and started parking in different places, even if it was less practical. I didn't want any easy pattern to follow anymore. A few days later, I received a message from him. It wasn't aggressive, nor was it long. It just said that he missed training together and that I didn't need to disappear like that. I didn't respond. I blocked the number and deleted the conversation, but that didn't bring relief. For the rest of the week, I stayed alert for any sign of him near my building or my workplace. One afternoon, while leaving the grocery store, I thought I saw someone who looked like him on the other side of the street standing near a dark car. I'm not sure if it really was Troy or just someone with the same height and posture, but it was enough to make me quicken my pace and get into my car without looking back. At the end of that week, I passed by the gym by chance and saw the parking lot almost empty. The building was there, normal, as if nothing had happened. I thought about how something so routine had turned into a constant point of tension in my life. I never went back to train there. I changed gyms, changed schedules, and stopped making small talk with strangers for a long time. To this day, when I unlock my car at night, I always open the door quickly and look straight at the back seat before getting in. Some people don't handle boundaries well, and when you try to set them, they show who they really are. A few weeks later, I ran into a longtime employee from the gym at another branch of the same chain and casually mentioned Troy. I asked if he still trained there. The guy made a strange face and said he didn't remember anyone by that name attending the late-night hours recently. He commented that they had had problems before with a man who changed schedules according to people, but that he ended up being told to leave when someone complained. That unsettled me in a different way. It didn't seem like I had been the first to try to distance myself. Maybe just the first to notice early enough. Today, when I think about that night in the parking lot, what bothers me most isn't the immediate shock. It's his calmness. The way he got into the car, sat down, and spoke as if it were a necessary conversation, not an invasion. There was no direct threat, no shouting, no violence, just the quiet certainty that he didn't accept being discarded. Since then, I've learned to take discomfort seriously. If something feels wrong at the beginning, it doesn't get better with time. Some people call insistence friendship, others call invasion closeness. I learned the difference the hard way. Story 4. I was 16 years old and living with my parents in a mid-sized U.S. city. In a very typical residential neighborhood, wide streets, front lawns, people walking their dogs in the early evening. At that time, I was going through a pretty rough phase, kind of isolated, not really wanting to talk to anyone at school, and my refuge was staying in my room playing online games. It was a basic routine. I'd get home, do the bare minimum of chores, have dinner, and go upstairs to my room with my headset on. That's how I met Ryan, a guy I ran into almost every night in the same game. He was nice, patient, and always seemed to know what to say when I was irritated or feeling down. Over time, he became that constant presence I looked forward to at the end of the day, like someone who understood you without you having to explain much. The problem started on one specific night when his tone changed out of nowhere. I'd just turned on the console and he was already online, calling me directly. At first, it was normal. We played a few matches and talked about random things. But then he started pushing again that idea of we should meet in real life, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I'd brushed it off other times, saying it was complicated, that my parents wouldn't allow it, that I didn't even know where he lived. But that night, he didn't accept no the same way. He became too calm and started talking as if he'd already decided for me. I laughed nervously and tried to change the subject, but he kept going, saying it wouldn't be that hard because he already knew the area where I lived. When I asked what he meant by knew the area, he didn't answer right away. He went silent for a few seconds in the voice chat, one of those silences that feel longer than they really are. Then he started describing things about my street as if he were recalling a place he'd seen before. He said there was a curve near my house, that the houses had open garages, and that at night one of the streetlights flickered from time to time. I felt an immediate cold drop in my stomach, because it matched reality. It wasn't a generic description. It was details you only notice if you've been there, or if someone tells you very precisely. I laughed nervously and said he must be guessing, but the calm way he kept talking made it clear it wasn't a guess. He started mentioning even more specific things, like the color of the corner house and the fact that near mine there was a large tree that cast shade in the late afternoon. My heart started racing in a way I'd never felt before while gaming. I muted my microphone for a few seconds just to breathe and think about what to do. When I came back, he asked if I'd gotten nervous and said I didn't need to be, because he would never do anything without me wanting to. That didn't reassure me at all. On the contrary, it sounded like someone trying to convince me of something I hadn't asked for. That's when I decided I needed to talk to my parents, even knowing it would be a difficult conversation. I left my room without turning off the console, my heart pounding so hard it felt like you could hear it in the hallway. I went to the living room where my parents were watching TV and said I needed to talk to them right now. My voice came out louder than I expected, a little shaky. When I started explaining, I tried not to exaggerate, but I ended up saying everything at once. The game, the online friend, the months of conversations, and especially what he'd said that night. When I mentioned that he'd described our street in detail, I saw both of their expressions change immediately. My dad grabbed the TV remote and turned it off. My mom sat up straighter on the couch. It stopped being internet stuff very quickly. We all went back to my room. My dad asked me to show him Ryan's profile in the game and any saved conversations. As I navigated through the menus, I realized how much I'd trusted without noticing. Ryan's profile looked normal at first glance. Photo of someone my age, short description. Nothing obviously strange. But when my dad started asking simple questions, where he said he was from, how long he'd been playing, whether he had social media, I realized almost everything came only from Ryan's messages, never from anything verifiable. My dad asked me to write a message directly asking where he lived. The reply came too quickly. He dodged the question and said it didn't matter anymore. Meanwhile, the chat started filling with messages. He noticed I'd gone offline on voice chat and began asking why I'd disappeared. My dad told me not to respond right away and opened the older message history more carefully. That's when things became even clearer. In messages from weeks earlier, I'd mentioned things that seemed harmless at the time. That I lived near a school, that there was a dead-end street nearby, that my bedroom was at the front of the house. Loose details dropped into conversations about the game. Together they formed a pretty accurate map of where I lived. My mom went pale when she realized that. There was no hacking, no magic, just too much attention from the wrong side. My dad decided to send one last message saying I wouldn't be meeting anyone and that my parents were aware of the conversation. The reply came almost immediately, and the tone changed completely. He said there was no need to ruin everything like this, that he just wanted to get to know me better, that I'd given signs I wanted that too. Then he sent a message describing exactly what the front of our house looked like, mentioning the color of the door and the type of fence in the yard. The air seemed to disappear from the room. There was no longer any doubt that he knew where I lived. My mom told me to shut everything down immediately. My dad unplugged the console from the outlet and asked me to close my bedroom door. The three of us stood there for a few seconds in silence, hearing only the distant sound of the TV in the living room, now turned off. My hands were freezing and I couldn't stop thinking about every detail I'd shared over those months without realizing it. My mom went to my bedroom window and carefully closed the curtain, as if someone could be watching at that exact moment. We didn't see anyone outside, but the idea that someone might be there completely changed how the house felt. It was no longer an automatic safe place. It was an address known by someone I'd never seen. Shortly after, my dad received a notification on his phone. It was an attempted message from the same profile, now through another app linked to the game. He wrote something short, saying he didn't want trouble, that he just wanted to talk properly. My dad didn't respond. Instead, he started searching the profile image using reverse image search. It took less than a minute for results to appear. The photo wasn't his. It belonged to a student from another state and was used in several different profiles. That confirmed what we already suspected, but seeing the proof made everything heavier. The person I'd been talking to was never who he claimed to be, and the only real thing in that relationship was the access he'd gained to my life. That night turned into a strange vigil. No one really slept. My dad alternated between checking the doors and windows and looking at his phone, while my mom tried to keep me occupied on the couch, asking simple questions just so I wouldn't be alone with my thoughts. The neighborhood was as quiet as always, but every passing car sounded louder. At one point, my dad went out to the garage and came back saying everything was normal, but you could see he was tense too. I kept replaying old conversations with Ryan, trying to pinpoint when things had crossed from normal into dangerous. Nothing had seemed obvious at the time. That was what scared me the most. There hadn't been a clear warning moment, just a line that had been crossed little by little. Around midnight, the profile tried to contact me again. Not through the game or the old app, but through an email address I didn't even remember associating with the account. The message was short and written like a calm request. It said I didn't need to involve my parents, that he just wanted to explain better, that I'd misunderstood everything. My dad deleted it without responding. A few minutes later, another message arrived, this time mentioning that at that hour the street got very dark because the streetlight flickered. It was exactly what he'd described before. My dad stood up immediately and looked out the living room window. No one was visible, but the fact that someone knew what the street looked like at that moment made everything heavier in a different way. That's when my parents decided it had gone beyond what was acceptable. My dad called the police and calmly explained the situation without exaggerating, just the facts. An online profile using fake photos, messages with detailed information about our house, and insistence on contacting a minor. While he spoke, I sat on the couch hugging my legs, trying not to think about how much I'd unknowingly made everything easier. The police advised us not to respond to any more messages, to save everything, and to stay alert for any strange movement outside. They said a patrol car would drive through the neighborhood that night. Even knowing someone would come by, the fear didn't lessen. The idea that the person could be anywhere on the street was worse than knowing exactly where he was. After the call, the house went quiet in a strange way. All the lights were on, but it felt like the darkness was waiting outside. I went to my room with my mom to grab a few things and realized how that space had changed meaning. The computer, the console, the headset, everything that used to be a refuge now felt like an entry point. My mom helped me disconnect everything and put the cables in a drawer. When we went back downstairs, my dad was looking out the front window. He said a car had driven by too slowly, but he couldn't see who it was. It might have been someone lost. It might have been something else. That night, every possibility felt too plausible. The patrol car drove down the street about 20 minutes later. The lights reflected off the houses and disappeared quickly at the corner, bringing relief that was too brief to last. The officer didn't knock, just made the round and left. Even so, my dad seemed calmer afterward, as if the mere presence had placed some invisible barrier between us and the unknown. I couldn't relax. I kept thinking that if that person really was nearby, he'd know exactly when the police left. What scared me most was not knowing whether it had been a real attempt to show up or just another form of control, a way of showing he could reach us whenever he wanted. After that, the messages stopped. No emails, no notifications, no new contact. The silence was almost worse than the messages. I stayed awake late, lying on the couch staring at the ceiling, listening to the normal sounds of the house as if they were new. Every heater click, every distant car noise felt amplified. My mom stayed with me until I fell asleep, something that hadn't happened in years. I remember thinking, before falling asleep, that all of it had started with conversations that felt too safe. There had been no clear threat, no explicit request, just someone gathering information piece by piece until he knew more about me than I realized. The next day, the household routine changed without anyone needing to say it out loud. My dad left for work later to walk me to school, something he hadn't done since I was little. My mom asked me not to tell friends anything for now and not to use that game or any account connected to it. I agreed without arguing. I had no desire to turn the console on anymore. What had been a distraction now felt like an open risk. I spent the entire day with the feeling that someone had been very close without me noticing, and that made everything feel strange, even the most normal things. Looking out the window became automatic, as if I were waiting to confirm that no one was there. That night, my parents sat with me and calmly went through everything again. We deleted old accounts, changed passwords, and removed personal information from any profile I had. It was during that process that I realized how naturally I'd talked about my life in conversations I thought were safe. It hadn't been a direct confession or an obvious mistake. It had been trust built up little by little. When we finished, my dad said something simple that stayed with me, that the person hadn't needed to break into anything because I'd opened the door myself. That hurt more than the fear, not out of guilt, but because it showed how easy it is for someone to get close when you're vulnerable. In the weeks that followed, nothing concrete happened, but the feeling didn't go away quickly. The profile never appeared online again, and no new messages arrived. Even so, I spent a lot of time thinking about how simple it had all been. There had been no invasion, no direct threat, nothing that immediately raised alarms. Just someone patient, listening, storing details, waiting for the right moment to use them. Sometimes I remembered old things he'd said, advice that had seemed protective, and realized how that also served to keep me close. It wasn't friendship the way I understood it. It was someone creating access, step by step. Today, when I think about that night, what scares me most isn't imagining someone on the street watching my house. It's knowing he never needed to be there physically to cause all of that. All it took was talking, listening, and waiting. I still play online games, but never the same way again. I avoid talking about routine, address, schedules, or anything that connects the game to my real life. Trust, I learned the hard way, doesn't disappear all at once. It gets taken away little by little, until you realize you've given more than you should have to someone who was never who they claimed to be. Story 5. I returned to my hometown in rural Pennsylvania a few weeks after my mother died because I needed to take care of her house and get everything ready to sell. I didn't want to be there, to be honest, but there was no way around it. It was a small town, the kind where everyone knows everyone else's car, and I felt like a stranger even though I'd grown up there. During that time, I wasn't sleeping well, eating whatever I could and spending my days sorting through papers, clothes, and objects I didn't know what to do with. The house had that smell of old wood mixed with cleaning products and dust, and the silence of the place felt heavier at night. I was alone, because my job allowed me to take a few days off and I didn't want to drag anyone along with me. On the first night when I actually managed to sit on the couch and try to rest, I heard a light knock on the front door early in the evening, when there was still light in the sky. I opened it and found Caleb, a guy I had been friends with when we were kids. I hadn't seen him in years, since before I moved away to another city. He had the same easy smile as always, as if time hadn't passed, and said he'd heard about my mother. I thanked him a little awkwardly, and he said he wanted to help however he could, that I shouldn't be alone there. The problem was that as he spoke, he started bringing up old things in such detail that it made me freeze. Like he was pulling open a drawer I'd kept closed for a long time. He began recounting episodes from our childhood as if they'd happened yesterday. He talked about a time I'd hidden in my parents' basement after a bad fight, even remembering the weak light bulb that flickered and the smell of mold. That caught me off guard because I'd never told anyone that detail as an adult. I tried to laugh it off, saying kids remember all kinds of nonsense, but he didn't laugh with me. He kept talking, recalling names, times, small choices I'd made back then. He said he'd always known when I was going to leave town, that he'd noticed before everyone else. As he talked, he walked around the living room as if he already knew the space, running his hand along the back of the couch, looking at old photos on the shelf without asking. That made me uncomfortable, but I still tried to keep the conversation polite, chalking it up to small-town nostalgia. When it got late, I said I needed to rest and that the house was still a mess. He agreed too quickly, like he'd been expecting that, and went to the door. Before leaving, he commented that I still used the same type of light bulb in the living room, that the yellowish light suited the house. I didn't remember turning on any different lamps since I'd arrived. He said goodbye with a brief hug and said he'd stop by the next day to see if I needed anything. I closed the door and stood there for a few seconds, listening to his footsteps crunch away on the gravel driveway. The feeling of being watched didn't go away when the sound disappeared. I went to the kitchen, drank a glass of water, and tried to convince myself it was just exhaustion and grief messing with me. The house fell silent in a way that wasn't comfortable. It wasn't the normal quiet of night. It was an attentive silence, like the place was waiting for something to happen. I locked the front door out of habit and went to check the back door that led to the yard. It was locked too. I went back to the living room and turned off the lights, leaving only the hallway lamp on. I sat on the couch with my phone in my hand, scrolling through whatever without really paying attention, just to keep my mind occupied. Every so often I remembered the way he'd moved through the house, touching the furniture like it was familiar. That didn't match someone who hadn't been there in years. Still, I forced myself to believe he was just being overly nostalgic. I went to the bedroom around midnight, exhausted. I lay down without changing clothes and turned off the light. It took me a while to fall asleep, listening to the normal sounds of an old house, wood expanding, a distant pipe. At some point during the night, I woke up with the clear feeling that someone was there. Not a specific noise, just that heavy perception of presence. I lay still, listening. Then I heard a low sound coming from the living room, like the friction of someone sitting down slowly on the couch. My heart raced. I held my breath, trying to make sure I wasn't dreaming. The sound repeated, followed by a slight throat clearing, very close. I got out of bed slowly, feeling the cold floor under my feet, and stood still in the dark hallway. The hallway lamp was still on, exactly as I'd left it. The living room was partially lit, enough to see the outline of the furniture. That's when I saw someone sitting on the couch in profile, arms resting on their knees. The body was leaning forward, far too relaxed for that hour. I recognized the silhouette before he even spoke. Caleb slowly turned his head toward me and said my name in a low voice, as if he didn't want to wake anyone. I asked what he was doing there, my throat dry. He answered naturally that he'd come to see if I was okay, because he thought it was strange I hadn't sent a message. I said the door was locked. He gave a sideways smile and looked down at the floor for a second before replying. He said that had never been a problem between us. He said he'd always had a key from when we were younger because my mother trusted him. That hit me immediately. I didn't remember any spare key besides mine. He kept talking like he was recalling something trivial, saying he'd never returned it because he thought one day he might need it. As he spoke, he ran his hand along the arm of the couch, the same place where my mother used to sit. The way he seemed at ease there made my stomach churn. I asked why he'd never looked for me after I left town. My voice came out harsher than I expected, mixed with fear and anger. He took a moment to answer, as if choosing his words carefully. He said it wasn't the same after I left, that I'd moved on while he stayed there, watching everything remain the same. He said he'd tried to call me a few times, but that I was already too far away to notice. As he spoke, he didn't get up from the couch. He didn't seem ready to leave. He seemed like someone who had finally reclaimed a place he felt was his by right. He commented that the house had always been important to him too, that he'd spent more time there than I remembered. I said this needed to stop, that he couldn't just enter the house in the middle of the night. He nodded but didn't stand up. He said he understood, but that he didn't accept being left behind like that. He said it while looking around the living room, not at me, as if he were speaking to the house itself. At some point, he mentioned that he'd always known when I would come back because things like that don't go unnoticed in a small town. That sent a strong chill through me. It wasn't just about the key. It was about surveillance, about following from a distance for years without ever really showing up. I realized the conversation wasn't heading somewhere safe. I stood there in the hallway, unsure whether to move forward or back, trying to keep my tone from escalating things. I calmly asked if he could leave and return the key. He looked at me for the first time with something different on his face. Not anger, but a kind of heavy disappointment. He said he hadn't come to fight and that I was reacting badly because I'd always been like this, running away when things got difficult. That hit too deep, because it touched something true, something I recognized in myself. He slowly stood up from the couch, not moving toward the door, just standing there, as if he wanted to show he wasn't hiding. When he stood, I realized how comfortable he was in that space. He knew where to step without making noise, avoided furniture in the dark like someone who'd done it many times. He said he'd never accepted the fact that I left without looking back, that some people get stuck in places and people that make sense to them. He said the key was never about sneaking in, but about not losing access. That phrase made me go cold. It didn't sound like a direct threat, but like a justification he'd thought about for a long time. I felt I needed to end it immediately, before the conversation turned into something I couldn't control. I took a step back and said clearly that I would call the police if he didn't leave right then. I didn't raise my voice or threaten physically. I just spoke like someone who'd already made a decision. The word police seemed to break something in him. His body went rigid for a second and his gaze stopped wandering the room and focused on me. He took a deep breath and said he didn't want to ruin everything again. He walked to the front door without hurry, like he was leaving his own house, not mine. Before going out, he placed a key on the sideboard, exactly where my mother used to leave mail. He said I'd always known where to find important things. He opened the door and stepped out, letting cold air in for a few seconds. I locked the door as soon as he was outside and leaned my back against the wood, feeling my legs weaken. I stood there for a while, listening to his footsteps fade on the gravel until they disappeared completely. After that, I walked through the entire house, checking windows, doors, and the yard, trying to confirm he'd really gone. Everything seemed normal, too normal for what had just happened. I sat on the couch, still warm from his body, and stared at the empty living room, trying to understand how someone could carry such a heavy presence and yet vanish without leaving a trace. The silence returned, but it wasn't the same silence as before. I didn't sleep again that night. I sat in the living room with his key on the sideboard, staring at that small object as if it were something much bigger. The idea that he'd had access to the house for so long, maybe for years, started to line up with small things I'd ignored since I arrived. A glass out of place, a light turned off that I was sure I'd left on. That strange sense of presence I'd blamed on grief. None of it felt random anymore. The house hadn't been invaded that night. It had been used, frequented, almost shared without my knowing. When the day began to lighten, I went to the kitchen to make coffee and noticed the back door was unlocked. I was sure I'd checked all the doors after he left. That filled me with a deep exhaustion more than fear. I locked it again and sat at the table, listening to the morning sounds outside. Cars passing, someone opening a garage. Normal life was returning while I tried to accept that someone from my past had never accepted staying there. It wasn't just about the key. It was about the idea that to him, that house was still a point of return, and I had just been someone who left without asking permission. The next morning, I called a realtor and asked to speed up everything as much as possible. I didn't want to spend another night there. While talking on the phone, I walked through the house gathering spare keys I found in old drawers, places my mother used to keep things. I found 2 copies I hadn't known existed. That gave me a strange tightening in my chest, like the house held more secrets than I was ready to deal with. I changed the locks that same day without thinking twice and put the old keys in an envelope along with the one he'd left. I didn't want any more invisible access, any memory functioning as permission. Late in the afternoon, on impulse, I drove past Caleb's old house. It was empty with overgrown grass and closed windows. A neighbor I vaguely remembered was outside and told me he'd moved a few days earlier, without telling anyone. That made me realize the early morning encounter hadn't been improvised. He'd already been on his way out. The key on the table wasn't a farewell gesture. It was confirmation that he'd been there when he wanted, for as long as he wanted. I went back to my mother's house with a weight in my chest and finished packing my things before dark. I left that house 2 days later. I didn't wait for the sale or finish organizing everything like I'd planned. I took only what was truly important and left the rest to be handled from a distance. Before leaving, I stood for a few minutes in the empty living room, looking at the couch where he'd sat that night. The house looked ordinary again, silent, with no sign of anything out of place. Even so, the feeling that the space had been shared without my consent stayed with me. Some presences don't announce themselves. They linger out of habit, out of memory, out of refusal to accept that time has passed. I never saw Caleb again after that. No one in town could say exactly where he went. Sometimes, when I returned to Pennsylvania to take care of something quickly, I pass by my mother's street and feel that same tightness in my chest, like something stayed behind with me. It wasn't the night itself that marked me the most. It was realizing that some people don't disappear when you leave. They just wait for you to come back. And some never accept that access is over. Story 6. Was in my first year of college on a small campus, the kind that feels like an isolated little town, with old dorms and not much to do at night. I had gone far from home thinking it would fix me, but the truth was I was pretty lonely. I wasn't shy in the classic sense, I just didn't know how to fit in. I went to classes, ate in the cafeteria, and went back to my room. My roommate's name was Ethan, and at first he seemed like a stroke of luck. Funny, outgoing, the kind of guy who starts conversations with anyone. He included me in small things like going to get food late, watching a game in the common area, walking around campus when I was frozen with anxiety. I remember thinking I'd finally made a real friend there. The way it turned into something bad was subtle, and that's what still gets me today. At first, it felt like care. If I said I was going out with some people from my class, he'd joke that they were kind of fake, but laughing. If I got invited to a party, he'd say it was better to avoid it because it was full of weird people and I wouldn't like it. Little by little, I stopped going. Not because he forbade me, but because he always had a comment that made me uncomfortable, as if I'd embarrass myself if I tried to socialize. And when I still tried, small things started happening. Someone would suddenly be cold with me. A group would stop responding. An invitation would disappear. I thought it was my paranoia, or that I was just bad with people. Until the night I realized it wasn't coincidence. The night started far too normal for something that would go so wrong. It was a Wednesday. The campus was quiet, and I'd come back early from the lab because a group project had been canceled at the last minute. When I got to the room, Ethan was there, sitting on his bed messing with his phone, with the lights off and only the desk lamp on. He asked why I was back early, and I explained quickly without making much of it. He made a comment saying that group had never been trustworthy, and laughed, but this time there was no joke afterward. The laugh died too quickly. He kept watching me as I dropped my backpack like he was evaluating something. Shortly after, I got a message from a classmate asking if I'd said something about her. The message was confusing and a little defensive. I replied that I hadn't, not understanding. Before I could ask more, she saw it and didn't respond. I showed my phone to Ethan, half laughing, saying I had no idea what was going on. He shrugged and said that those people make things up, that I should stop trying to please everyone. It sounded different from his usual tone. It wasn't advice. It was direction. For the first time, the idea crossed my mind that he might be involved somehow, and the feeling was too bad to ignore. While I tried to respond to another message that came right after, Ethan stood up and started walking around the room, messing with things for no clear reason. He opened the window a bit, closed it, sat down again. I asked him directly if he'd said anything about me to anyone. He didn't deny it right away. He took a few seconds like he was choosing which version to use. He said he'd only cleared some things up because people on campus were confusing and could hurt me. He said it with a strange calm, like he was justifying a favor. That tied my stomach in knots. It wasn't the first time someone had said they were protecting me, but it had never sounded so calculated. I decided I needed to leave the room to think. I grabbed my jacket and said I was going for a walk. He instinctively stepped in front of the door, without touching me, just occupying the space. He smiled and said it was late, that it didn't make sense for me to go out now, that I always got worse when I walked alone at night. I asked him to excuse me. He moved aside but kept watching me as I left, like he was counting my steps. In the hallway, I felt immediate relief at being out of that space, but also growing anxiety, because I realized I was starting to measure my actions based on his reaction. That wasn't friendship. It was control disguised as care. I walked around campus trying to cool my head, passing dark buildings and weak streetlights that gave everything that empty, late-night college feel. My phone buzzed a few times, short messages asking where I was, if I'd be long. I didn't respond. I sat on a bench near the closed library and tried to organize my thoughts. That's when it hit me how much my connections had shrunk over the past few months. People who used to talk to me had drifted away without a clear explanation. Invitations had stopped. I'd blamed it on my social difficulty, but now it felt like something else. Like someone was pulling the strings while I thought I was tripping on my own. When I went back to the dorm, the room was quiet. Ethan was sitting at the desk with his laptop open, the screen turned slightly away, like he didn't want me to see it. He closed it as soon as I came in and said he was worried, that I'd disappeared. I took a deep breath and said we needed to talk. I said something was wrong, that I felt like he was interfering in my life outside the room. He didn't raise his voice or defend himself. He just looked at me with intense, almost clinical attention, like he'd been waiting for that moment. He said I was starting to understand, and that was good, because it avoided misunderstandings. That response didn't fit a normal conversation between friends. I asked directly why people were distancing themselves from me, why conflicts were appearing out of nowhere. He tilted his head, thought for a second, and replied that I always did better when I had fewer distractions. He said I was more productive, that I seemed calmer when it was just the two of us in the room. That made me feel small, like my life had been reduced to an experiment. I said that wasn't his decision. He nodded, but then added that someone had to decide, because I couldn't. He spoke in a low, almost instructional tone, like he was explaining something obvious to a child. The coldness of it gave me an immediate chill. I tried to set a boundary right then. I said I was going to request a room change the next day, that living together wasn't working. That's when his face changed completely. He didn't get aggressive or yell. He got too serious. He said plainly that he'd chosen me because I was easy to isolate, because no one would fight for me if I disappeared from social life. He said it like a fact, not a provocation. He said other people were loud and unpredictable, but I was consistent. The word chosen hung heavy in the air. I realized that to him that relationship wasn't something that could end by agreement. It was a silent possession. I said that didn't make sense, that no one chooses another person like that. He gave a half smile and replied that it made sense precisely because I didn't notice when someone was taking up too much space. He said I confused attention with friendship and silence with peace. As he spoke, he started listing specific situations, names of people who drifted away, conversations I thought had cooled on their own, small rumors that had appeared and died quickly. He described everything like someone reviewing a job well done. At no point did he raise his voice. The calm was the most frightening part because it showed that it had been thought through, adjusted, maintained over time. I tried to leave the room again, this time without arguing. I grabbed my backpack and said I was going to sleep on the couch in the common area. He didn't physically stop me, but he stood up and said that would only make things worse, that people would misinterpret it. He said I needed to stay where it was safe. When I opened the door, he added, almost as a warning, that requesting a room change wouldn't solve anything, because he knew how those things worked there. That made me pause for a second in the hallway, hand on the doorknob, realizing I was dealing with someone who didn't accept losing access. This wasn't a roommate conflict. It was someone who'd invested too much time in reducing me. I spent that night outside the room, sitting at one of the tables in the dorm's common area, backpack on the floor and phone in hand, pretending to study. I couldn't focus on anything. Every time the hallway door creaked, I lifted my head thinking it was him. At some point, I got a message from a classmate asking why I'd spread a rumor about him. My stomach dropped. I replied saying I had no idea what he was talking about. The response came cold and short, and the conversation died there. That confirmed what I already knew. Ethan wasn't just passively isolating me. He was actively pushing people away, creating enough friction that no one wanted to get close. Around 3 in the morning, I went back to the room to get a charger. I opened the door slowly and found Ethan sitting on the bed in the dark, looking at his phone. He looked up when he saw me and said I looked tired, that the whole situation could have been avoided if I'd trusted him more. He spoke like he was genuinely disappointed in me. That scared me in a different way because there was no anger there, just conviction. I grabbed the charger without responding and left again, with the clear feeling that for him, that night wasn't a passing conflict. It was a negotiation he didn't accept losing. When daylight started to break, I'd already made a decision. I went straight to the housing office as soon as it opened, still with dark circles under my eyes and without sleeping. I didn't try to explain everything in detail, just said that living together had become unsustainable and that I didn't feel safe in the room. The staff member asked the standard questions, wrote some things down, and said she'd see what she could do. As I spoke, I realized how hard it was to explain something that left no obvious marks. There was no shouting, no direct threat, nothing that sounded urgent on paper, just the constant feeling of being watched, managed, shaped by another person. I went back to the dorm to pack my things temporarily. Ethan was there, sitting at the desk like he was waiting. He asked if I'd slept well in an almost gentle tone. I didn't respond. I started putting clothes into my backpack, trying to keep my hands steady. He said I was exaggerating, that everyone needed someone to take care of them at some point. When I said I was changing rooms, he was silent for a few seconds, and then said that didn't change the fact that he still knew me better than anyone there. That didn't sound like a direct threat, but it stuck in my head like an uncomfortable promise. The room change went through late that afternoon. I was placed in a temporary dorm on the other side of campus, sharing with someone I didn't know, but who at least didn't watch me like he was cataloging me. I avoided Ethan after that, changed schedules, started studying in crowded places, and kept my door locked at all times. Even so, for a few days I had the feeling I saw him at a distance, standing in hallways, in the cafeteria, in places where it didn't make sense for him to be. I was never sure if it was real, or if my mind was trying to protect itself again. He never spoke to me again. He didn't need to. Today, when I think about that night, what scares me most isn't what he said, but the cold logic behind all of it. He didn't want to hurt, yell, or threaten. He wanted access. He wanted to be the filter between me and the rest of the world. It took me a long time to understand that isolation doesn't start with locked doors, but with small decisions someone makes for you, until you think you have no one left. If there's one thing I learned there, it's that some people don't make friends. They choose. And when they choose, they don't accept being left behind.
Thank you very much for your company until the end. Your support is what gives life to this channel. If these stories have caught you, don't forget to leave your like and comment on your opinion. And if you are not yet part of our community, sign up now to receive the next real horror stories.